In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the microscopic structure of skeletal muscle. The learning objectives for this lesson are going to be split up over two smaller lessons. For today, we are going to be focusing on the macroscopic structure, and then we're going to look at the microscopic structure. There are a lot of key words associated with this lesson. We're going to probably get down to talking about the sarcoplasm, or even just the sarcomere, and in the next lesson we're going to be looking at these structures here. It's really important that you understand this terminology, and please don't forget there's a glossary at the end of the chapter to help you understand these words. Okay, so first of all we're going to be looking at the macrostructure. And this is the skeletal muscle. So this is what we can see very easily with the naked eye, and we can feel it underneath our skin. Now the skeletal muscle, remember, allows bones to move. So we can see here the belly of the muscle, the origin and the insertion points here of the biceps brachii. And we can see that the muscle is actually attached onto the bone by tendons. So just to remind you, the skeletal muscle is held together by connective tissue, and that connective tissue is what ends up becoming the tendons. Wrapping around the muscle itself, so around the entire outside of the muscle, is connective tissue called the epimysium. And this holds all these bundles of muscle fibers together. Underneath that, you can see that there's these individual bundles that are also wrapped separately, and this is called the perimysium. So the reason why we have these individual wrappings, if you like, of connective tissue is so that we can have the perimysium working, allowing these muscle fibers to work independently of other muscle bundles. Next, we're going to be looking at the muscle bundles itself. Now within each bundle, so here in this diagram we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bundles, and within each bundle, so this is one bundle here, we have individual muscle fibers. So you can see all of these things here are the muscle fibers. Now when muscle cells fused together, we get these really long fibers that will run the length of that muscle. Now, just to remind you, a muscle fiber is a long cylindrical cell, and this is what makes up skeletal muscle. So you have muscle fibers that are enclosed together in bundles, which makes up the entire skeletal muscle. Now if you look at page 18 of your booklet, you'll see a diagram similar to this. So we're just going to fill out part of it. So again, we're just focusing on a really obvious muscle group that we can all identify, the biceps brachii. And we can see that connective tissue from the epimysium ends up forming the tendons, which attach onto the bone. Within that, we can see these muscle bundles, and then within each muscle bundle we have the muscle fibers. So again, one muscle bundle containing individual muscle fibers here, and we should note that this is one muscle cell. So this one muscle fiber is one skeletal muscle cell, and it is multi-nucleated, which you can see by these raised bumps here, which signify the nuclei. If we look at the end of one muscle fiber, we can actually see even smaller structures called myofibrils. Now each myofibril is made up of the smallest unit, which are called myofilaments. So I know that's a lot to take in, but we're going to break all of that down and talk about them individually. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at the structure of a muscle fiber. So please remember, a muscle fiber is one muscle cell. Now we know that muscle cells are called muscle fibers, and we know that they're long, they run the length of the muscle, and we've just discovered they are multi-nucleated, so they've got many nuclei along their length. Now, if we look at this picture here, so this is one muscle fiber, we can see the myofibrils and the myofilaments. Now, this membrane surrounding the muscle fiber is a type of plasma or cell membrane called the sarcolemma. So that's a key word that you need to know. So the cell membrane in a skeletal muscle cell is the sarcolemma. The cytoplasm, therefore, where each of these myofibrils are found, is the sarcoplasm. Now, although we haven't mentioned them, we need to know that for muscles to move, that requires energy. So therefore, within the muscle fiber, there are many mitochondria as well as the nuclei. So just to recap, this image here is showing one muscle fiber, which is a skeletal muscle cell. The membrane is the membrane is the sarcolemma, and the cytoplasm is the sarcoplasm. Okay, so now that we've looked at muscle fibers, we're going to be looking at the myofibrils that make that up. So here again, this cartoon diagram is showing one muscle cell, and within that we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 myofibrils. Now these myofibrils are constructed of really tiny structures called myofilaments, which we're going to talk about in a second. Now this yellow stuff surrounding each myofibril is called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So we've heard something similar before in eukaryotic cells. We've talked about endoplasmic reticulum, but because this is specific to skeletal muscle, we know that we have the sarcoplasm and the sarcolemma, and this is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And here we can see the mitochondria, these orange things. Now, in order for muscle contraction to work, that's the mode of movement in muscle cells, it needs to have a supply of calcium ions to enable that function. And this is why the sarcoplasmic reticulum is important. It's a storage site for those calcium ions, which are essential for that muscle contraction. Now, if we focus in on the myofibril, so this is one myofibril, we know that it's made up of these light purple and dark purple bands. These are strands of protein called actin. That's the thin bluey purple one here. You can see that here and here. And then we have myosin, which is the thicker purple band that seems to be in the middle. Okay, so the myofilaments are called actin and myosin, and the myofilaments are what make one myofibril. Now, the arrangement of the myofilaments creates this banding pattern. Also, we describe muscle as striated or stripy, and that is because of the arrangement of these myofilaments, the actin and myosin. Now, we can see the zigzag line that shows us where one section starts and the next section ends, and this creates this nice regimented pattern, and the distance between here and here is called a sarcomere. Okay, so from one zigzag line to the next is one sarcomere. Alright, so that's a lot to take in, so we're just going to recap again on what we've learned so far. We know that skeletal muscle is made up of bundles of muscle fibers. So here we've got skeletal muscle, and we can see within that are these bundles of muscle fibers. Now these muscle fibers are actually muscle cells, and these muscle fibers or muscle cells are actually made of myofilaments. And myofilaments are made up of myofibrils, which are proteins that are made of a thin substance called actin and a thicker protein called myosin. And these actin and myosin myofibrils are the myofilaments. Okay, so we're going to go back to the booklet page, page 18, and we're going to fill out this diagram. So the first thing here is that we know we're looking at the biceps muscle, and within that we are isolating one bundle of muscle fibers which are wrapped in a membrane. You don't need to know the name of it, but it is the epimysium. Number 3, we know that we have got one muscle fiber, and we know that this one muscle fiber is made up of smaller units called myofibrils. So number 4, this is a myofibril, and a myofibril can be sectioned off into sarcomeres, that's between these zigzag lines. And if we zoom in on a myofibril, we can actually see it's made up of a thicker protein called myosin and a thinner one called actin. Okay, so just to summarize all these words and what we've talked about, first thing we want to mention is that the skeletal muscle cells are called muscle fibers, and these contain many mitochondria because remember, muscle contraction requires ATP. It's a very energetic process. Muscle fibers are also multinucleated because they're very long. They run the length of the muscle. The membrane surrounding muscle cells is called the sarcolemma, and the cytoplasm of skeletal muscles is called the sarcoplasm. We also know that each muscle fiber is made up of smaller units called myofibrils, which are found within the sarcoplasm. That's the skeletal muscle cytoplasm. And they're surrounded by a tubular network of sarcoplasmic reticulum. Now, those sarcoplasmic reticulum will release calcium ions as required for skeletal muscle contraction. We know that each myofibril, as can be seen here, is made up of myofilaments, and the two myofilaments that we need to know about are proteins called actin, which is the thin one, and myosin, which is a thicker one. So this is myosin in the middle, and this thinner blue one in this diagram is the actin. Finally, we know that a sarcomere is the distance between the contractile units within the myofibrils. So between one zigzag line and the next is one sarcomere. Okay, so to ensure that you understand what we talked about today, please make sure that you complete pages 18 and 19 of your booklet, and ensure that you use the glossary and pages 196 to 197 of your textbook to help you. It's important that you complete page 198, that's questions 1 to 5, to ensure your understanding of what we have learned about skeletal muscles so far.